Hi, welcome to Module Specifications 101. This short talk is an overview of module specifications. More importantly, it's a series of questions or challenges to ask yourself and others as you create a new module specification. Understand the form. The module specification is really a concise description of what happens within a module. It does focus largely on the content within a module, but it also provides important information about the assessment, about the intended learning outcomes, and includes important information on things like the level and the credit value of a module. Like many other documents we produce, it has multiple purpose, and its primary purpose is a source of information for students. But it does also have a regulatory function. It's used in validation and approval. That means that if we need to change this module specification, we do need to go through a quality procedure. One reason for making sure that we get our module specifications as good as we possibly can and future focused when we initially set them up. At the end of this presentation, you will see a link to a module specification pro forma with details on all the sections that are included. If you're not familiar with those already, it may be worth doing that before you continue this presentation. Work backwards, not forwards. So when starting your design of a module specification, where do you begin? Now, there may be a natural tendency to work forwards. What do I mean by that? Well, if the module specification that you are designing is based on an existing one or existing ones, or even something similar, there may be an instinct to go and get that and think about how it can be modified or adapted. Instead, I would challenge you to work backwards to avoid any preconceptions or odd ideas that already exist. Ask yourself the what question. What would go in this module specification based on your intelligence as an expert in the area and your knowledge of the subject? From this list, come up with the new specification. And then, and only then at that point, look at the previous specifications to see if any ideas or content that has been produced against that specification can be used to enhance your new specification design. Life cycle. Now, one really important consideration when designing a new module is the life cycle of the module. What we want you to think about here is the content that's going to go into this module and making sure that the content within that is stable. Typically, a module specification would last between 5 to 7 years in terms of its applicability to the subject. Now, I understand completely that subjects are moving very, very fast, particularly in your disciplines. But even within those disciplines, there are lots of core principles and ideas that remain stable throughout time. Now, in your content area, you can be quite clever with wording in order to protect the life cycle of the document and presenting unnecessary changes. For example, thinking about my own background as a biologist, if I wanted to put in a module specification something along the lines of dealing with the new CRISPR technologies that are currently emerging through the sector, it may be more prudent on me to write, we'll cover emerging genetic technologies as the content area. That way, if CRISPR does not take off or is superseded by a new technology, I can simply change the lecture and seminar and lab content without needing to modify the module specification. How and what? The module specification doesn't require you to provide a scheme of work on descriptions about how the module will be delivered to the students. But I do think it's important to start that consideration whilst planning your module specification. The reason being, this can have knock-on effects on your learning outcomes, your module content, and your assessment, key components of the form. I mean, you're already in a blue sky mode from looking backwards on what wants to be included in the module spec. So turn your head and ideas to how the module will actually be delivered as well. Think beyond the traditional structures that you have in your areas, whether that's 2 lectures and 2 labs, or a lecture preceded by a lab each week, and think about what would be the best way to deliver this material to the students, ignoring any existing preconceptions on space and time. Use these as a starting point for a wider discussion about the best way to deliver this module and then all modules in the programme. Assessment. Now, one area that requires great consideration when producing a module specification is the assessment. The reason being, it's the area that's most frequently changed and the area that's most often challenged by students. Because you're in a blue sky thinking mode, let's turn your attention to the assessment. And there's 3 things I'd like you to consider. The first is the mode of assessment, i.e., what assessment type will the students be asked? And are these assessment modes that you've come up with the most appropriate for testing the learning outcomes? Though there's no suggestion from me that you do, we need to think beyond the most obvious forms of assessment, examinations, essays, and laboratory reports that we see in universities across the country, to the much wider pool of options that exist. Think very much about these assessments and which one provides the students with the necessary technical and transferable skills to be successful. There is a separate talk on assessment types in higher education for those of you that aren't aware of the range of possibilities that exist. The second consideration is practical implications. So think very much about what this assessment will actually look like to the students and to you before you submit your final module specification. How practically will it be delivered? How easy will it be to assess? How easy will it be to provide feedback? All of these considerations, if considered now, can avoid any problems when the work is presented to the students. And finally, with other module teams, consider the pattern of assessment across a module. Though we don't want to have all assessments the same or all assessments different, understanding the broad pattern of assessment types may be important for the student's general development. Where next? This slide includes some QR codes. The links have been provided separately to a few resources that may help you with your module specification design. The top one is provided by our Centre of Quality Assurance on writing module specifications, including a completed form with details. The second link takes you to curriculum development and design. Also on our own SharePoint site, includes some useful information on assessment, design and considerations. And the final one takes you to the QAA site, which includes loads of useful links on design and development of programs and modules.